Uh, Hi, I'm Miles Cameron. Today's subject is writing fighting. I could go off on that for a long time because I have a little Twitter thing going called writing fighting, but I think we're just going to talk about writing fighting in fantasy. Today I have a stellar panel, and I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. So MJ, go ahead.
Hi, my name is MJ Kuhn. I am a fantasy writer from Detroit, Michigan. So I only have one book out. My debut novel just came out last September.
Woo-hoo!
So it's called Among Thieves. It's out from Saga Press in the US and Galance in the UK with the cool yellow on there. So yeah, I'm excited to talk some combat with you guys.
Alex?
Hey guys, I'm Alex Darwin. I have a series out called The Combat Codes. It's kind of a martial arts inspired science fantasy universe. And I've also written some short fiction and nonfiction. Most recently, I was proud to write a piece for Rolling Stone magazine about Anthony Bourdain, who is one of my heroes. Yep.
Scott?
Yep. Hello, my name is Scott Oden. I'm a writer from Alabama. I've written a couple of books. My favorite one is Gathering of Ravens. It's trying to give a redemption story to an orc, and hopefully I did that well. I don't know about the other people, but I'm probably one of the only people here that's never actually been in a fight in real life, even a fake one. So, and
Well done, Scott.
I
You
know.
haven't missed a thing.
I know. I've never thrown a punch in anger,
Good on you. Brian?
I write about it, but I've never actually done it. So it'll be interesting to hear how other people do it.
I'm Brian Staveley. I'm published by Tor Books. My first book was The Emperor's Blades. The most recent book, which came out this summer, is The Empire's Ruin. They're all set in the same world, follow a lot of the same characters.
Sweet.
Cool. So I made up a list of questions, which I hope you all have reviewed. I want to say, MJ, I love Detroit. And those are words you seldom hear an American say.
Right. It's a bad rap. It's not that bad. It's pretty
It's
nice.
really not that bad. No, we did a big martial arts thing there, BC, before COVID, and we all loved Detroit. Sorry. So moving along, what's your favorite fight scene in literature / a movie? I don't really care. Pick one. Again, now I'm going to start with Brian.
I really should have looked at the questions, but I have to go with the fight between Achilles and Hector at the end of the Iliad. And what I love about it is the fact that the whole poem has been building and building and building to this conflict. The great warrior of the Trojans, the great warrior of the Greeks, and then when the moment happens, Hector runs away. He's terrified, and Achilles has to chase him around the city 3 times. And I think that's just such a heartbreaking moment that what's going to happen. Hector's going to get his ass kicked, and he's going to be killed, and he's going to have his body dragged around the city behind a chariot. And Hector knows too. He knows he's not going to win that fight. And then after running away, he stops and he gathers his courage and he actually fights. And I think it's one of the most moving scenes and one of the most moving fight scenes in all of literature.
Well said. You knew you were going to get my complete agreement with almost anything about the Iliad. Scott?
Favorite fight scene, probably from a Robert E. Howard story called The Blood of the Gods. It's one of his El Barak stories. It's the duel near the end between El Barak and an Englishman named Hoxton. They're fighting on this tiny ledge, and I read it at an age when it really made an impact on me. So that was the fight scene that convinced me I wanted to write fight scenes. And it's poetic. It's it's visceral. It's everything you would want in a fight scene. But then you realize it was also written in 1930. So it's great. That's probably my favorite one. Second favorite in a movie will be the movie version of the one Brian just mentioned in the movie Troy.
Yeah.
The fight between.
I don't feel like that captures the emotion, but the choreography of that.
The choreography is
unbelievable. Yeah.
It looks
really
like how a spear fight should look to me.
Cool.
It's a good movie.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of jump around, so I don't know if I have one favorite one. I actually recently really enjoyed the series Arcane. I don't know if you guys have seen it on Netflix, and I thought some of those fight scenes, I was just like, I know it was the animation was part of it, but the actual context of the fight scenes and the stakes were just incredible. I was like really blown away by that show. I don't want to give away spoilers, so I know people are still watching it. So, in fiction, I'm a really big fan of a book called Musashi, about the Japanese swordsman. It's by
Yep.
an author named Eiji Yoshikawa. It was written, I think, the late 30s,
Late 30s.
which
Yeah.
is like for me unbelievable because I read pretty modern stuff. I like pop stuff. I like pulpy stuff, but this book like holds up like nothing else. It reads almost like a fantasy book. And it just follows Musashi, the swordsman, going across the Japanese landscape, and kind of reinventing himself from kind of more of a barbaric, animalistic warrior into a more refined swordsman. And he just challenges everyone to duels, and it all leads up to this one final duel. I don't want to give away spoilers, but yeah, a lot of those fight scenes in that book are incredible. I highly recommend it.
MJ?
Yeah, so I was thinking long and hard about this when you posed this question, and my example is probably sounds maybe lame compared to some of the ones you guys brought up here, but I just love it so much. The fight sequence between Inigo and Wesley in The Princess Bride at the top of
That's
that
a good
book.
one. That's a great one.
I love it for a lot of reasons. The choreography is incredible, but I think I like the humor that it brings to the fight. I like the levity, and I really like that it is a great example of a fight sequence that's not really all that violent, which I think is a fascinating thing. And yeah, so that's my favorite.
Those are all great examples. I'm going to play today. Yesterday, I didn't play much, and I'm going to say I love Musashi, by the way, Alex. Fabulous novel. I think I've read it twice.
Yeah.
But my shout out is to Roger Zelazny. I think I was 14 or 15 and just getting heavily into fencing when I read Nine Princes in Amber. And there's a fight that goes all the way up a cliff on a winding stair. And I've even tried to recreate that with friends, fencing upstairs for like hours. It just, I don't know. And I've actually stuck similar homages into books. There's something about it, the difficulty of going up instead of down. And it was really well written. And the well written part, right? Like that's what we're all trying to do. And that's what sort of sticks with you, whether it's the Iliad or MJ, I got to agree. Like it's such a great scene. And it also has a lot of little fencing jokes, which I guess if you're not a historical fencer, maybe you don't care. But you have studied your Agrippa. They're not actually doing Agrippa, but it's a nice little poke. So now we're going to do, when you write a fight scene, how do you plan it? Do you let it grow organically? Now, I asked a bit of this yesterday, and I don't think I did it well. So let me try again. Like, when you write a fight scene, do you know how it's all going to work? I'm not really talking about the end. I think we all know that the main character has to survive. Or do you see in your head a really cool move that the fight scene's always going to be based on? Or do you just sort of let the fight scene flow along, heading for a conclusion? And this time I'm going to start with Alex.
Yeah, so as far as where the fight scene fits into the narrative, that's something I try to plan ahead. I do tend to pants things a lot, although I'm doing so less lately. I've tried to become more efficient, and I'm working at that. But as far as the actual combat itself, I tend to let flow organically. But I need to get somewhere with it. I need to have a starting point and an ending point that's actually progressing the narrative to some extent, almost like a dialogue would. Like, just like anything, you would have a dialogue or a fight scene or a sex scene, any of those things. I need to progress the narrative. But as far as the actual fighting itself, I do tend to let flow a bit more organically and see how it works out, and then pick it up in editing.
Brian?
I have a confession, which is that I really don't like writing fight scenes. And I almost never, I mean, my books are filled with fight scenes, but I almost never write them on the first draft. And then, you know, my beta readers get it and they're like, what the hell? Like, we want to see this fight. We want to see this fight. You got to have this fight. Why'd you skip all the fights? And I'm most interested in the psychological condition of the characters immediately before the fight, and in the psychological ramifications in the aftermath of the fight, and the actual trading of blows. For me, almost like it has to be dragged out of me. Once I start writing it, I get into it, but I've already written the before and the after. And so everything that's happening in that fight, in my mind, is in reference to that context. So it's almost like I'm less interested in the fight itself than I am in how it is changing the people who are taking part in it. And I already know how they are going to be changed by the end. So that's the angle that I come at it from. But I always forget, even sometimes my agent, like we're very near the end, and she's like, you've been setting this fight up for like 2 books and now we don't get to see it. Like, it happens off screen. What the hell's wrong with you? So I don't know. It's a failing.
I'm going to cut in just because I want to say to that, Brian, I agree. And one of my other favorite fight scenes in all of literature, there's a historical novelist named Patrick O'Brien, who I think is one of the greatest voices of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And O'Brien sets you up throughout Master and Commander for the big frigate duel with the Spanish frigate. And then it doesn't happen. It's just a quick flashback, because the writer knew Jack Aubrey was going to win. So there's no point in writing that scene.
Yeah.
What he deals with instead is how many of his friends are now dead, and the cost, because he's never really faced losing a bunch of crewmen before. And that is good writing. And there's no fight scene. And I think that's super clever. Anyway, sorry. MJ.
Yeah, I'm actually with Brian a little bit. I am not a huge fan of the actual writing of the fight sequence. They are the second most difficult scenes for me to write. First most difficult for me is anything involving anything romance related. I'm very bad at it. But the fight sequences, again, once I get started, just like Brian said, I can get into it. But yeah, how I don't generally plan out all of the beats up front. I know the end point. And then I just kind of know the players that are on the board, what weapons are on the board, what, powers, since it's fantasy, if anyone has magic on the board. And then a lot of me writing fight sequences looks kind of like this, because I'm just kind of trying to picture it and then transcribe what I've pictured when I, think up something cool onto the page to get me to that end point. But yeah, so I'm not planning all the beats, which is funny because I am like a hyper plotter for my general processes, but not for the fights.
Scott.
I plotted out in very tiny, intricate detail using tabletop miniatures. And sometimes even I'll set up like paper markers and I have trouble visualizing fights in my head because I've never actually seen one. I'll watch YouTube videos of people fighting and try to figure out, I guess it's called the beats. That's a good word for it. And then try to structure it like music, where you have high points, low points, small stretches, and then a bunch of stuff at once, and then another pause. And yeah, I can spend 10,000 words writing a 5,000 word fight scene. And most of it will be edited out. And what I keep, I try to focus on the emotion of it, but not always, because most of the people I write about don't have normal human emotions. And they actually enjoy killing people. So it's a little bit harder in that aspect, but yeah, I will plot it out. I'll have boards of stuff laying around, and I'm like, please don't touch this. This is a deadly fight scene. And it looks like somebody just ripped up pieces of paper like a cat's been living here. So
That's so
Scott,
cool.
I don't want to talk too much, but I'm going to say once a year, I go visit some university buddies, and what we usually do is play out as giant war games the big battle scene in whatever novel I'm writing. And sometimes I just let it change the novel. What actual players do is always more interesting than what I thought of.
Well, see, I had you, one of your writing fightings actually answered a question for me, was how would you fight a spear with a long sax? And that came in really handy.
And it's actually in Fiore. Yeah. So that's a nice segue to the next question. And I want to be careful about this question. So my question is, do you do any martial arts yourself, and does that impact how you write? But if you don't do any martial arts yourself, talk about what influences, like we sort of just did about Little Men. I do martial arts and I still use the Little Men to work things out. But like, if you do martial arts, talk about how that influences. If you do or don't, talk about what are the tools? Because really, I think we're talking to other writers here, and we should tell them what tools we use to write a fight scene. So I'm going to start this time with Scott.
Okay. I do not do any martial arts. I've never done any. My brother was the martial artist in the family. What I do, most often I'll start with an archaeological record to get the proper weight of various things that they might be wearing or carrying. For the longest time, as a younger person, I thought a sword would be heavy, like everybody always says. I'll find a real world equivalent for it. So a sword weighs as much as a little bit less than a 2-pound bag of sugar. And it's, when you put it in that context, it's easier to imagine trying to swing it around for, 30, 45 minutes at a time. I read a lot of books on fighting, especially Stephen Pressfield has a process he calls cross-pollination, where he will read history books from a different era and try to port over things that would probably have taken place in the same era. Like he used Native American archery to fill in gaps for his Sarmatians and his Amazons. So I'll do the same thing. I'll read things about soldiers in Vietnam, World War II, World War I, and try to port that over to somebody either in a fantasy world or in antiquity to see how it would play, I guess. Other than that, I do a lot of the Little Men. That's my primary thing. And it sounds really morbid, but I know a few people who actually have killed people, usually military or police. I'll ask them these weird questions, and they'll look at me like I'm strange. And then I'll tell them what it's for, and they'll answer it, and they're happy to talk about the feeling behind it. So that's where most of everything comes from, just research like you would anything else. So.
MJ.
Yeah, so I also have never done martial arts. It's funny, Scott, my sister also was very into martial arts. She did like a bunch of Taekwondo and stuff, but not me. I do some like boxing, and I've taken a few fencing lessons, but like nothing, I didn't actually like continue on with it. I'm not good at it. But yeah, I think most of the research that I do for fights is in other books, whether it is like history books or just other fiction, works of fiction. Try to, see what other people are doing, see what I think resonates for me when I'm reading a fight sequence, what kind of realism I want to try to bring, and then, continue and do some more research on my own with the weapons and players that I have on the board. I did do some field research for Among Thieves. So my main character in Among Thieves fights with axes. So she has like throwing axes and hatchets and stuff. And I went to like an axe throwing bar. I call it research. It was just fun. But it really did help me to get the idea of, the motion of throwing an axe, what, your arms, how mobile you have to be able to be and stuff like that. So that's the only field research that I've done for fighting. I also have never thrown a punch at a human, Scott. So we
don't feel so bad now.
Alex.
Yeah, so I do martial arts. I'm a lifelong martial artist, which can work for and against you, I think, in certain ways, as far as writing fiction, um, as I'm sure Miles knows. But yeah, I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling, which is kind of like wrestling with submissions, and I've done a bunch of other martial arts, that like mixed martial arts, and Muay Thai, kickboxing, through the years. Although nowadays, as someone nearing their 40s and with kids, I really don't like getting hit. I never really like getting hit. I mean, some of the, boxing, Muay Thai, you walk away, even light sparring, with kind of like a headache, and you wonder, this probably is not so good for me, especially if you want this writing career to be something long term, or any sort of career outside of combat sports. But grappling is a little bit more gentle, although currently I have a back injury, so maybe not so much. But I find teaching is a lot, actually, the thing that helps me the most as far as tying over to writing, because in order to teach beginners, you really need to simplify the language. And what doesn't work is kind of, especially, you're writing a fight scene, you don't want to overwhelm a reader with too many details, or things that are too obscure. So really, that's what you need to do when you teach. Try to break down the essential components and be able to describe, techniques, with things that the student will understand. So I do find that useful. Yeah, but martial arts is definitely a big part of my life. I watch a lot of, and now I'm especially because I'm injured right now. I've been like on the bike and even swimming to repair my back, and I watch and I think about fighting a lot. It's just kind of something that is always, and not even in a. I mean, you guys are talking about like throwing punches. I've never been in like a aggressive fight out of anger, or even like under the influence or anything. It's just kind of training and combat with people that I consider my peers and friends.
Brian?
I'm a dabbler in martial arts. I coached fencing for a high school team for a while, but I was not a good fencer, and I've done some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I was also not good at that. But I love the experience of all that, and but I would say it sounds as though I'm a good degree less technical than some of the other folks have been. I don't want to get things egregiously wrong. I don't want somebody to come to my books being like, well, that's just stupid. That's unrealistic. But mostly what I'm focusing on in writing the fight scenes are more sort of the emotional and psychological side. So I'm curious when people's, fear breaks into panic. I'm curious when like pain brings somebody's strength versus saps their strength. Right. I'm curious how a pre-existing relationship with an antagonist is going to shape the way that the fight unfolds. Who is pulling punches? Who's not pulling punches? Are they even expecting the same things out of the fight? So I think a lot more about that stuff than maybe the choreography of the actual fighting. And I'm a dabbler in martial arts, but I do a lot of like long trail runs and a lot of rock climbing. And so those experiences of being kind of at some kind of limit and finding what happens psychologically at that limit, that's what's most interesting to me about writing fighting, rather than this move, especially in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's like, this move, now you have these 6 things you can do from this, and then that spawns this like decision tree, right? And I don't get too far into the weeds in that, mainly because I don't know anything about it, but also it's just kind of not where I'm going. It strikes me, I don't know if this is useful to draw this distinction, but for the rest of this panel, like sometimes when it seems like we're talking about writing big battle scenes, right, which is one type of fighting that you can write, and sometimes we're talking more about like one-on-one or small scale combat. And I don't know if this will come into play later in the discussion, but those seem like quite maybe different skill sets and even different enterprises to be lumped under the same term. 2 people like trying to claw each other's eyes out in the mud is different from like the Battle of Stalingrad or something. Anyway, I don't know if that's useful to think about as we go or not.
It is actually, it's funny, Brian. I was literally thinking of that as you were getting to it. And because I don't want to like just run, I don't want this panel to be like yesterday. I want it to be different. So I think we will divide those up and maybe talk about the difference between writing battle scenes. Because I'm going to skip ahead. I'm pretty sure everybody would agree that the whole point of writing a fight scene, like writing a romance scene, MJ, is to build character, not to titillate the audience. So, or build character, move plot, you know, all those things that Aristotle and everybody afterwards talks about. And big battle scenes are a completely different animal. I'm going to roll with you, Brian. So, and instead of going to the next question, I don't even know necessarily. I know Scott has written a few big battle scenes, but I don't know if everybody writes big battle scenes. If you do, how is it different from writing a duel? Let's talk about that. And Brian, I'm going to stick it with you to start because you kind of came up with the idea. So,
I'm much more with Scott. I do have to have the map of the terrain and an understanding of a whole bunch of additional elements. But I think the danger is, and I think this is a danger with a lot of elements of writing that have a technical aspect, is that you can very easily go far too far into the weeds for your reader. Some readers really want to know how every individual unit is deployed and how they're all moving at the same time. And these are the people who go through like the Battle of Gettysburg and spend 3 days there walking through the entire battle. Some readers want that, but I think generally it's possible to overdo. So I, in my own head, have all the information. But then it's a matter of me figuring out what pieces of information here. I'm breaking up. Is this better now? Yeah. It's a matter of figuring out of the 10,000 facts I know, what needs to be on the page. It's sort of like a twofold process. One, me inventing the entire battle in my head, which involves a lot of what Scott's describing. And then two, me pruning it really, really aggressively so I can see it in a way that kind of makes sense for the reader and keeps a narrative through line instead of like getting into the weeds of what every single unit is doing at every single moment.
MJ?
So yeah, I actually have never written a big battle sequence. All of my fights have been more like scrappy rogues, one-on-one. I am in my current like work in progress. I am writing my first approaching a real battle. And it has been a unique challenge because there are so many additional players on the board from what I'm used to writing a fight sequence. So yeah, I have yet to actually orchestrate a full on, Two Towers Helm Deep style battle. So
Alex?
Yeah, so I'm certainly not nearly as experienced in writing big battle scenes as single combat. I have written a few, and they are more difficult for me. I think I take it from kind of a cinematic perspective, which is actually what I do take a lot of my writing from, in which I pretty much just picture the shots in a film for the battle. I do plot it out a bit more and try to if I'm switching POVs, I do find that helpful with the bigger battle scenes to cover more ground, especially if it's opposing forces and getting a lay of the land in different geographical areas if it's covering a large ground. But it's certainly a skill that I'm working on, and you're right, it's 100% different. You might have individual skirmishes that have a lot of the properties that a single combat would have, and certainly I can use that. I can use my experience in writing those. But as far as the wide shots of the battlefield that you might have in a movie like Braveheart, that is new ground, and I think that's certainly a different skill.
Scott?
Well, I'm going to be a bit of a contrarian and say that there's not actually that much difference between writing a duel and a large battle scene.
Drat, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I gotcha. A large-scale battle is nothing but a bunch of small duels. So you plot it the same way. I always find a real life template to hang a battle on, and I always use music. It's always just like music. You'll have lulls, you'll have high points, and all your job is to stretch it out as much as you need to fill in your space and to make sure you give everybody something to do besides just hack and slash. Everybody needs a purpose in a battle if you're going to switch to their point of view. Sometimes that purpose is just to die. I think it's Joe Abercrombie that does this great thing in The Heroes where
that's a great scene.
One person will carry the point of view, he'll get killed, his killer will carry the point of view, he'll get killed, the killer will carry the point of view. And it goes about 6 times through this thing. And that's amazing to read. And it's something I've always wanted to steal and use.
That's a great scene that's an incredible scene.
But yeah, it's to me, there's no difference. It's larger scale, more moving pieces, but pretty much the same thing. So
I think the question of point of view
is
just
finding.
Is Scott totally frozen?
Oh,
Scott, yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah,
Scott, I'm going to sort of cut you off for a moment because you're so broken up.
Well, I was just going to pick up on what Scott was saying and maybe toss it.
It's actually my favorite, probably Abercrombie book. Oh,
yeah.
So,
Brian?
And
yeah, I think the question of POV is crucial when you're talking about the big battles. Like, if the point of view is of an individual soldier who's on the front lines, who's having their face shoved into a shield, you're gonna write a different that battle. The same battle is going to be different than if it's from the point of view of a general who's on the hilltop watching the whole thing. And it really depends on where you want that to fit in your book, what you're trying to do with it at that moment. You could write the same battle, obviously, 1,000 different ways.
So I'm going to jump in here because I love writing big battle sequences, and there are things I love and hate about big battle sequences. But there's a 17th century master general named Raimondo Montecuccoli who wrote a book on basically how to be a great general. And one of the things that he suggests in that very
it's not on my end.
What's happening?
I don't know.
Safe. The internet is rebelling against us.
Yeah. Anyway, Montecuccoli suggests that big battles are fencing duels between master fencers. And then because he's a realist, he also says, actually, you should never commit to a battle unless you have overwhelming advantages, because once a battle starts, it's all luck. Anyway, and I like balancing those two ideas from one guy. Like, it's a fencing duel, but things just happen and go wrong. I'm actually going to jump back to things MJ and Alex said earlier and say, I have some very interesting experiences of large battles from commanding them and reenacting. So I've actually gotten to command on horseback and had 3,000 people who had to respond to my orders without radios, and the confusion and the friction. That's all interesting. But at the same time, I think everybody said this, and I just want to hit it hard. You don't have to have done it. You can sample it. Like, whether it's, I'm really into martial arts, Alex is really into martial arts, but actually you can sample martial arts and learn a lot. And often I'm going to go with Scott, just picking up the 2-pound bag of sugar. You can go like, well, I'm not a master fencer, but I just learned something useful. Like, something I recommended to another guy a while back is just wear a sword for an hour, and you'll never write about people jumping from building to building while wearing rapiers quite the same way. You don't have to live your life wearing a sword, just wear it for an hour. And I feel the same way about writing big battle sequences, reading and a little sampling. And what I love to do, which is actually going to a place where I've decided the battle is happening, a real place, and kind of looking at it and going, I won't go on too long, but I was just at Plataea, where one of the largest battles in Western history happened. And my friends and I were looking at how tiny folds in the ground and what looks like a flat field would hide thousands of men. And we know that happened because it's in Herodotus. And so we're standing in various places that Herodotus says the commanders stood and going, oh my goodness, everything over there is invisible, even though we all think it's flat. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's super cool. I will definitely put that in a book. Anyway, not to go on too long. I'm going to riff off of some stuff that's coming up in comments. And my favorite comment so far is that obviously MJ and Scott should have a fight, because the two of you will punch each other and you'll both learn a great deal. That comes from the comment section. But what I thought I would ask, because Brian kind of touched on this, and I think it's a really good point, is do you view multiple POVs as essential to either a fight or a battle scene? And I think that's a really interesting question. I'll maybe give my 2 cents worth at the end, but like, what do you have to say about multiple POVs? And I'm going to start with MJ again.
In general, I'm a big fan of multiple POVs. I think I have written one project ever in my life that was a single POV through the whole story. So big fan of multi POVs. I think, though, that there is some value in showing a single POV, especially in a battle, and especially if it's someone right on the front lines. I think that has a different sort of weight than seeing the whole picture, just seeing the crush of the fight. I've read a few books that has just that, and you feel very disoriented, but in a designed sort of way as a reader, which can be really powerful. But I mean, there's always value in jumping around to different people's heads and seeing, I've written a few one-on-one fights where, I have the fight from one person's perspective, and then I have a chapter break halfway through the fight and we hop to the other person's head. And we maybe repeat a few of the blows, but it's a totally different experience because you're seeing it through their emotional reactions now. So I guess I'm kind of sitting on the fence here.
I'm going to go to Brian.
I don't think there's a right or wrong about multiple POVs, single POV. It's like asking what key, is there like a right or wrong key to write a piece of music in? It's like, what are you trying to do with the scene? What are you trying to do with the overall story? The Heroes, to kind of piggyback off of what Scott was saying, is a book that involves, the whole story involves lots of POVs. And a lot of it is about like the bafflement of a lot of people who are in this fight. And so it makes a lot of sense to have a scene where you're head hopping and moving from person to person, but that's not always going to be the story you're trying to tell. So I don't think there's POV is a tool that you use in the furtherance of whatever end you have in mind. And so I don't think there's one that's right and one that's wrong. It really just depends on the story.
Alex?
Yeah, so I definitely make use of multiple POVs, even in single combat duel type of situations. I find them really useful, especially kind of getting a quote unquote crowd perspective. If you guys have ever martial arts, I mean, if you could imagine just watching a fight kind of in a vacuum, it tends to be quite boring unless you're really tuned into the technical stuff, which most people aren't. And what actually brings out a lot of the character of the fight and the emotion is kind of getting in the heads of the people that are looking from it, whether it be, a family member that has some stake in it, or a trainer, or a friend, or in the case of a fantasy book, a mentor, a wise master, any of that stuff. I feel like it really brings it out. And kind of along those lines, if you watch any sport, martial arts, that sort of thing, again, any of those fights in a vacuum really, again, unless you're just paying attention to the technical details and you're kind of studying it, that's one thing. But it's from an entertainment perspective, it's not very entertaining unless you have that crowd that is watching. And so that can be a bunch of POVs, that could actually be the crowd itself, as kind of a POV in itself.
Alex, when I was 17 and thought I was going to be an Olympic fencer, I dragged my very unwilling girlfriend to a fairly high level tournament so she could see how great I was. And afterwards, I had done well. I said, like, what did you think? And she's like, I don't know. How did you do?
Yeah, Brian, as Brian was saying about jiu-jitsu, especially with the gi, the uniform on, it can be quite boring for, as I know from dragging people along for bystanders to watch. It just looks like two sweaty people that are lying on top of each other, fumbling at their pajamas.
Yeah. MJ, I believe it's your turn, MJ.
Oh,
Or did you start?
I already started.
Oh, so I actually want to sort of go a slightly different direction, and it's about POVs and battle scenes. But what interests me almost most, maybe this is as a scholar, but also as a storyteller, is why battles happen. And I'm going to be specific why battles happen. So yeah, you have two armies and you have countries that are at war with each other or whatever, and they come to a point and then they have a battle. And it's something that frustrates me, which is my segue to the next question. In some prose, but like how does the setup happen? Like, does it happen in the morning or the evening? Is it raining? And why did they fight here? Who made the choices? There's a great comment from another great general. It says, all battles are the result of two generals who believe they can win, and one of them was wrong. And I like to try and show a little of that decision-making process, especially if it's characterful for one of my characters, and also to, reflect the complete ignorance of some woman carrying a spear in one of the spear blocks who's like, I was drafted and here I am. And I have no idea why we're fighting here. And I'm just wet and cold and miserable. And here we go. And that, I don't know. I like doing that, especially if it makes a sharp contrast in sort of understanding and whatever. I would really like Scott back. And he came in and then he went away again. And that's too bad. I'm going to ask a really possibly unfair question. So the ground rules are you don't need to name the book or author. You can just talk about it in general. But what do you hate in other people's fight scenes? And I think I'll start with Alex.
Yeah, so this is a good question. And I think it kind of leads back to something you talked about before, Miles, as far as not having to know a massive amount about any individual skill, holding that bag of sugar or jumping from the roof with the rapier. And I totally agree with that. I think it's more about knowing what not to write. As Brian had said earlier, he dabbled in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that really, I've read his latest book, and it really did pay off in leading to any sort of grappling scenes, knowing what is totally implausible. And, we're writing fantasy, so plausible and implausible are blurred. But if you're trying to write a realistic fight, there are some things that really bother me. And such as you're watching a movie or TV show and a spy or whoever is going around strangling someone. So they strangle someone and they die. The person dies after being strangled for 10 seconds, which is not physically how the body works. Your blood supply, the oxygen is shut off to your brain. You pass out. And I've seen this happen. I've been choked unconscious multiple times. I've choked in a nice way other people unconscious, and they pass out. And then you kind of look at them. They pop up and say something really weird, like they just woke up from a dream. And it really feels like if you feel like you've been sleeping for a whole night, and you probably say something quite embarrassing, and that's it. You're okay. So that spy that choked out the baddie and on their way to the big boss, that person's about to wake up and go kill them.
Yeah.
And there's other little things like snapping necks. Like it's almost, unless there's of course we're talking about fantasy. If it's a giant snapping a human's neck, that's one thing. But two similar strength opponents, it's almost impossible to snap someone's neck. If you talk to hunters who actually have tried to kill a deer, I've read up on it. I've never done this, by twisting their neck. That's not going to happen. So it's about what not to do, and I think that's a big part of it. And I kind of, I'll annoy my wife to the end of the world by commenting on TV shows that we're watching that are just fun, and I can enjoy it. I'm not really that bad, but in my head I'm getting a little annoyed.
We had Scott for a moment. His video was moving. It looked okay to me. Okay, I'm going to go to you, Brian, and we'll give Scott some extra time when he comes back.
Well, I'll just use my own books as a confession. A thing that I have done, and I know it's wrong, but it's so narratively useful that I keep doing it, is the thing where a person gets knocked unconscious for like 2 hours, right? Like, it's not really, not that couldn't possibly happen, but that's not really a thing. But I bet that has happened half a dozen times in my books, because it is so narratively useful to end the scene or to get a person from one place to another, and I think I did it in Empire's Ruin in my most recent book, and I'm typing the words. I'm like, this is not accurate. This is not correct. And it's about to happen. So,
but it definitely fixes the problem.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting thing, that there's stuff that can happen in a fight scene that is not plausible, is not likely, but that you're nudged towards. And I don't know. I haven't gotten any slack for it from folks.
Brian, I read your latest book, and I didn't actually notice that. So you must have.
It's such a commonplace. I mean, you don't notice it, I don't think, because it happens in TV shows and books all the damn time, and I don't think it was until like maybe my third or fourth book that, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't like, so she's unconscious long enough for them to get her across the city, and then she's back and like fully functional, right? Like, if you're going to be unconscious for 4 hours, you're probably fucked up.
You're probably dead, yeah.
So, like, I don't know, but I keep doing it. So I don't know. Better luck next book.
I'm going to do it till someone stops me.
I think you're right. It's just so embedded in the popular consciousness of TV and film that people don't blink an eye. So yeah.
Opening sequence of Skyrim. You wake up, you don't know how long you've been out, right? Like, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
MJ.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go like a slightly different track, but I do agree, when something completely implausible happens in a fight, that also will pull me out of the experience. But I think for me, I have very low tolerance. This is just me personally as a reader, for really choreography heavy fight descriptions. Like, when I write a fight sequence, it's page or less usually, unless it's broken up by things and then they fight again. But like a big 5, 6, 10 page fight sequence of, just really nitty gritty details, where we're kind of losing the stakes and we're losing the emotion of the characters. We're not getting a lot of dialogue. That I'm a very character driven reader. And that's when it will lose me personally as a reader. So, but I know some people love that stuff.
MJ, never read my books. You'll hate them. I'm just going to say, what I hate most is people who don't understand how tempo works. And it's a subset of a larger problem, which I won't get into, but has to do with modern concepts of macho-ness, even when women are fighting. But like, the guy who gets knocked down, rolls over, and isn't dead because he has time to get back to his feet because he's plucky. And you go like, no, man, that was 3 tempos. What was the other guy or girl doing while you fell down, rolled over your shield, and got back up? What happened there? And like, tempo is such an essential concept in, anyway, that's the thing that drives me nuts. And it also drives me nuts especially in historical fiction, when the main character has to have the living crap beaten out of him or her before they can win the major fight of the thing. My experience, which may differ from Alex, is if I get the crap beaten out of me, I then lose the fight. That there is this almost degradation, almost like losing hit points in D&D, that when you hit a certain point, you're not gonna. It's not about being plucky. It's about the fact that all your reactions are slowed and you're living in jello while the other person isn't living in jello. That's my perception of it. Okay, I'm just going to run through comments really fast here. We have a zillion comments.
Yeah. It's lively. Popping.
We're popular.
All right.
And I'm just going to say, Scott, because you are apparently listening and texting, would you like to write in comments what you hate about other people's fight scenes?
Yeah.
Because that would be fair, because equal time for equal Scots. Matt Pierce has a great question. Okay, I don't need my questions. I'll just use Matt's questions. How do you guys feel about killing characters and then bringing them back, Marvel Comics style? Oops, did I say that out loud? I will. I'll go first. I have a tendency to kill characters I love best. I once killed the protagonist in a series, which I believe my editor saw as a shot, and I almost never bring them back. Once in a while, but there's got to be huge setup. It's a very interesting thing. It can be overdone. Whose turn to go first? I think it's Alex's turn to go first. Alex?
Yeah, I don't think I have as far as my experience as an author, I can't think of having done that. So I guess I'm sort of against it. I think I don't like it, but I'm trying to think of examples where in film or TV or books I've read, in general, I don't love it. I guess I understand for like big franchises why they do it, especially when there's multiple writers that are taking over, and it's really just kind of like a money make, like, I understand from a business perspective why it's done. From the perspective of an author, unless it's really something that is baked into your plot, like, you have this character that got killed off, but you figured out from the very beginning that they weren't really killed off, then I'm okay with it. But just bringing them back for the sake of it, just because they're a popular character, I don't really dig that.
Brian?
I agree with Alexander that I don't like, it has to be built into the story. But I have a general principle, which is that if you don't see the body in one of my books or in somebody else's book, if I don't see the body in a book, I just assume that person's alive. Like if they go over, if they fall off a cliff, if they go over a waterfall and just disappear, they're alive. And if they're dead, I really think that's a missed opportunity. If they were a character that mattered at all, that's like a dramatic moment for your story, for both that character and for the people who knew that character. If they just disappear over a waterfall and they're gone, I think you missed a shot. So there are definitely times in my books where, one in particular, where a character basically goes off a cliff and that character is not dead. And to me, that's just obvious. Like, I just assumed all my readers would be like, that guy is coming back. But a lot of people were like, oh, that guy's back. And I was like, yeah, I didn't think I was going to have a major character just fizzle away off screen. Like, no, that character, and I will kill main characters. I've killed protagonists in my books, but you're damn sure going to see it front and center. They're going to get like a Boromir style death, right? You got to see the first arrow and then the second arrow and the horn. You got to have all of that, So I'm really, though, powerfully against it when it seems against the rules of everything that a writer has set up, that suddenly a character who we knew was dead, we saw the body, we checked the pulse, and suddenly they're running around again. Unless it's like a zombie book, or if it's that kind of book, those are the rules. Great, I'm into it. But if it's not, I'm like, give me a break. And now I don't know what to trust. I don't trust you on anything.
Yeah, MJ.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I think it's like anything in writing, especially in fantasy, but probably, I haven't really written other genres, but probably all genres, as long as you are abiding by the rules that you've set up for your structure and your world from the beginning, and that's something that can happen, then as the reader, I shouldn't be blindsided by this person returning. When it feels cheap to me is when it's not been set up from the beginning and it feels like maybe the story just got stuck and we needed to bring someone back, or we like killed someone off for shock value, but oh wait, shit, we still need them. You know, that's when I get kind of like, okay, you know. Generally though, I'm very forgiving of stuff. I like to like things, so I can deal with a lot of stuff that makes me go.
I'm going to go back for the next question to something Brian said. So I think let's talk about death. Like, let's talk about killing and wounding characters and what we get out of it. And I will go around. I really miss having Scott here. I'm sorry. It seems he had to do this last year in my panel, so I feel vaguely guilty, which is weird. Like, how have I lost Scott? What have I done wrong?
He did say in the comments that the thing that drives him nuts is when he can't follow the choreography in a fight scene. This is quite a bit up in the comments because they're vigorous. But he said, "What I hate is trying to figure out the choreography." I'm quoting Scott here. Some writers have an eye and ear for writing the beats of a fight. Others just seem to try and cram too much into the narrative, and it confuses the flow. Yeah, I don't like that either. When I just am like, where? Wait, what? Who's where?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I thought they got knocked down. How are they? Yeah.
A good friend of mine says her phrase for that is trying to write a Marvel movie. And she works at Ubisoft, so she probably knows what it's like to try and write a Marvel movie. Anyway, so let's talk about killing characters and like killing and wounding characters, consequences. Let's call it consequences. And let's talk about what we like and don't like when we're writing consequences. I'm going to refer to Brian and say, I have a rule myself, and the rule is almost moral. I have experienced some elements of real war, and I think war is terrible. So when I write a battle scene, I just kill characters, sometimes important characters, and they don't get any heroism. Bang, they're gone. I have gotten more anti-fan mail for killing the Red Knight's young teenage female squire that everybody loved. Bang, in one blow, you didn't even see it happen, and she's gone forever. Then all the other things, kill dogs, that's fine. Kill the young teenage squire, not so fun. But real war just kills. It's terrible. And I want to get that across. But along with Brian, in one-on-one combat, duels, or smaller things, I want it to be former. And I want it to have meaning and whatever, because I feel like I'm not stuck in the morality of selling war. MJ.
Yeah, I mean, I don't shy away from killing a character. If it's, I don't know. I feel like this kind of leads a little bit into a discussion that I had in an interview I did a while back about the tendency of fantasy to sometimes drift into trauma porn, where, you know, we're, you know, just really traumatizing the crap out of these characters for what? So I think anytime I'm writing something that's going to have really dire consequences, I need to make sure that the consequences actually play out as they would. You know, you can't just have someone just get up and be fine after something really traumatizing happens. But I like to really like sit and take stock and make sure that anything I'm writing that has the potential to have that kind of consequence, that it's really earned its place on the page. And that I genuinely need to include this injury, this death, this violence, whatever it is, to advance. All three things need to advance forward at the same time. I need to advance the fight forward, the story forward, and the character forward. And if whatever consequence driving activity is happening is not going to advance all three, generally I will avoid it or axe it personally. But that's just my approach. I don't know.
Alex, and before you start, Alex, I'm going to say to Scott, who's listening, Scott, if you write out your answer to this question, one of us will read it aloud and you'll still be participating. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I think I come at this from a little bit of a different perspective, for good reason, in that I have not been in war, thankfully, and have not, you know, served or been on the police force and been exposed to that sort of thing. So I probably have a somewhat naive view of violence and combat, in that it's a part of my life that's actually pleasurable and good. So that's kind of, and as far as my writing, I come towards it in a very entertainment centric view. So it's just the nature of my stories. Again, a lot of it is single combat. A lot of it is martial arts oriented, almost similar to what you might see in anime. And I think a lot of that comes across in my characters and their enjoyment of combat. And part of it is the world building, like in the combat codes, the race of fighters who are having these single combat duels to determine the fate of nations are built to fight. This is their destiny, is to be to fight. So that definitely plays a perspective as far as the world building. So I think I probably tend to, in my narratives, to really place a lot of entertainment value on those fights, and that's again from my personal perspective, as far as violence in a martial sense.
Brian?
I think there's kind of a structural issue with consequences that I've run into in my own writing, which is that if you're writing a fantasy novel, at least the kinds of books that I write, there tends to be a lot of, adventuring and herring around to far-flung continents and worlds and stuff. And I think I shied away in my earlier books, almost unconsciously, from having permanent, serious consequences to fights, because I didn't know. I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? If I have, so I have some special force, like fantasy special forces in my books. And I was sort of like, well, what am I going to do with this character if I really dramatically injure them permanently? I don't know how to write a story with them. And I think that was just sort of a lack of imagination and sort of a cowardice on my part. And I've leaned more into, in my most recent book, one of the main characters is one of these special forces folks, and she takes real serious damage. And in this case, it's more psychological damage, but she's like, clinically depressed, and for like 3/4 of the book, if not the whole book. And I was scared to write this book, honestly. I was like, holy shit, people are not going to want to read. They want to come to these books for what Alex is describing, like to see these characters who kick ass just keep kicking ass. And I've got this character who's sitting in the brig of a ship, like just not doing anything, not like willing to even try. And that's not physical damage that she took in that place, but the psychological damage is just as real. And I don't know, the book went over really well, but I was scared as hell to write it, because it was okay, something goes wrong in the very first chapter, and the rest of it is just the consequence of it. And that character, she's never going to be able to be the same character that she was. And I haven't figured out what it means she's going to become, but it's actually been a really interesting not just a narrative challenge, but like an emotional challenge to try to write that. Instead of being like, okay, get up, dust yourself off, you're good, nothing broken, okay. It's like, no, you're broken forever. It's none of this heals. But I'm still going to write you for several more books.
Scott says, I think consequence in battle not only need to be useful to the plot, but for the sake of reality, it also needs to be somewhat random, especially in battles. Sometimes characters die. Then he says continued, but I haven't seen the continuation yet.
Suspense. We'll wait for the second half.
Yeah.
We'll wait for the second half. Brian, that actually fascinates me. The hardest book I ever wrote was about Alexander the Great. It was a historical novel. And to me, Alexander sort of descended into madness in the later part of his life. And writing that became a giant exploration of the darkest parts of me. And it took a really long time compared to the way I write other books. And in the end, anyway, yeah, with you. And I since then have developed a taste to read other people's dives. Mm-hmm. Before that, I might have been one of those people who, just wanted the good fight scenes. Mm-hmm. Other thing I'm going to say, and I'll try and make it quick, is I was in a bike accident last summer and got a piece of my bike through my shin. I actually went out and fought in armor and did stuff. It seemed like no big deal. And then it got infected, and then it got exciting. And having had that experience, and I've broken things before, but I've never really had what you would call a blade through the shin kind of wound.
Yeah.
will probably change how I write wounds and
Yeah.
physical consequence. And that I'd like to say is cool. It's not that cool because it's gone on and on. But I do now know that you can die of sepsis 6 full months after you took a wound.
Wow.
And that is also in a pre-modern world, kind of interesting. I see a second half to Scott, so I'm going to read it. I want to go back and touch on the first half, but no, I can't find it. Scott says, continue.
Talks about how people should die randomly in battle sometimes.
Right. For no other reason that they're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason to it. Just dropping an act of fate into the narrative. I've done this once or twice with primary characters. Thank you. Thanks. Coach the old person. It's totally useful. I don't know whether we had an hour or an hour and 30 minutes. Somebody want to comment?
I was told it was 90 minutes.
Okay, cool. Then I'm going to roll on. What would you guys like to talk about? We have run through. Oh, no, I have one more sort of heavy question, and I don't want to end on it, so now is a good time. All of us write violence. Do you worry about ending up writing violence porn? And I just want to, again, outline this question. It's an accusation that is leveled sometimes against fantasy and definitely against historical fiction, which I also write. Increasingly in the last 5 years, I've started to swallow that maybe there's some truth to this assertion and stop being so offended by it. What do you think of the assertion? How does it affect you, if at all? Do you react to it? And I'm going to start with Alex.
Yeah, I think I sort of talked about this as far as what MJ was talking about with trauma porn and how I address it, which may be from a somewhat naive perspective, given my own personal experience. That's and what I've read and learned. That's all I have as a reference. I think violence, we can look at that word and it can mean a lot of different things. For me, as far as violence without the anger and hatred behind it is a different thing, as far as just violence as a skill set. So I think violence has a connotation of having anger and hatred behind it, but as just a word, I see it more as a skill set, being something to be able to turn on and off for characters or for humans in general. I think I'm getting a little without the reverb right here from Scott, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, Scott.
Oh, no, poor Scott.
Scott, we love you.
I
And we
know.
want,
Yes.
I don't want to get like too off base here and philosophical, but I do think that violence has a place in a society. And again, I'm not talking about like violence as far as violence against people that are not opted in, but I think a society that doesn't embrace the human nature of us having violence within us and doesn't actually use that energy in an efficient way will kind of implode, and I think that can be taken on the individual level. I think people I see with people that get into martial arts and are able to actually utilize their violence and tap into it or become much calmer and peaceful people. And there's always outliers to everything, right? So this is not, there's obviously a lot of different type of people, and but I do tend to see, if you're not doing something physically active to release that energy, I think fantasy or any sort of books that have violence in them serve a place, or video games to kind of, for people to spend that energy they might have. That might be how they release that energy that is going to be inherently in every person. There's some sort of violent energy in people just inherently, and I think books and fiction and these worlds we create can help release that. Again, there's extremes that probably are beyond what are necessary. And I think readers need to choose their books carefully if they have any sort of personal trauma. And yeah.
Brian?
It's a great question. I've just been thinking about it. I mean, I think on one level, it's sort of guilty as charged in that we're all trying to write books to entertain, right? I don't think anybody's writing fantasy to write sort of moral treatises. I mean, I guess some people do, but I think front and foremost is entertainment. And if part of the entertainment involves violence and suffering, you know, QED, the violence and suffering is part of the entertainment. But it does that. My answer doesn't end there, because it seems like there's a way that you can handle it responsibly or irresponsibly. And maybe this comes back to, you know, questions of one, your world building, as Alex was saying. If you're putting together consciously a world where, let's just say, I'm just inventing a world, but where like people go into arena, they fight, and then they can be healed instantly when it's all over. You're setting the ground rules for your readers. So you're saying, hey, look, this is sort of a, we're interested in the psychology and the mechanics of fighting, but we're not interested in all the suffering. So that like sets up a certain kind of story, which I think maybe sidesteps the question. Or, you know, getting into the consequences we've talked about, maybe is just like a more honest way to handle, not more honest than what Alex is doing, but more honest than what I used to do in my books, where you know, this is ostensibly a real world with real people who somehow keep coming out of these scrapes again and again, and they're basically fine. I think the kind of writing I do now is more honest, and maybe that is more responsible. But like, I love watching videos of, like you know, I do a lot of these trail runs, and I like watching videos of like ultra marathons and people in the mountains, and it's all just suffering. I mean, it's suffer porn. It's these people who are out there for 20, 30, 40, 60, 100 hours. They're like puking up. They can't eat anything. They're hypothermic. They can't think. And they're just trying to get through the race. And I devour that stuff. I mean, I eat it and I like to do those kinds of races myself. So I like, that comes back to, I guess, the beginning. Like, I do think there is entertainment in watching real people, characters struggle and suffer. And that's part of what we're offering up.
MJ?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, Brian, there is entertainment in watching the suffering, but I think when it works for me, at least, is when the suffering becomes almost inspirational in a way, which I feel like it with those ultra marathons, which sounds horrible, by the way. Good job for you doing them. I will never. But, you know, there's like an inspiration of, like, you know, the willingness of the human spirit to continue on. You know, I feel like there's something there.
Yeah, exactly.
I think for the writing violence porn question, I think everyone as a reader and as a writer will have a different threshold for what is an acceptable level of violence to, you know, be consuming or creating. And I think this just comes down to, you know, no book is for everyone, and that's not wrong. That doesn't mean anyone is necessarily wrong. Now, I'm sure that there are irresponsible ways to handle violence, and like I said, I personally try to make sure that any violence I'm including has, like, I really feel like it's earned its way on the page. But that doesn't mean that someone who, you know, is writing something a little, you know, bloodier for the sake of it, it doesn't mean they're necessarily inherently wrong. It just maybe means that readers would want to be selective. I know there have been a lot of conversations about, like, the inclusion of content warnings and stuff. I think when people list them, like reviewers list them on review sites, I'm personally for it. You know, if another reader is going and looking for those things in preparation for reading a book, cool. You know, I don't know. I feel like it's a difficult question to answer for any fantasy writer. But I think as long as you feel good at the end of the day about what you're putting out into the world, and, like, you know that you're doing it with the intent to be responsible and not create violence porn, I think you're on the right track.
I'm going to take a bite at this one because it's near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to say I'm a big fan is too strong. Studier. of medieval chivalry and concepts of restraint in violence, most especially in China, Japan, and Western Europe in the Middle Ages. And the reason this interests me, partially because I've been in the real military and partially because I constantly write about violence. And I have a lot of fans who are soldiers, cops, prison guards. And we live in a society that uses violence all the time. It uses violence in some very wrong ways. I live in Toronto. I've watched the way cops interact with the homeless. As a former violence user, I don't approve of their techniques, and I think they could do better. But I guess, and I apologize for the moral tone, but this really matters to me. When I write some kinds of violence, and this is going to be weird, but when I write about people who are supposed to be moral, I want them to be moral about their use of violence. And when I write about people who aren't supposed to be moral, like mercenary killers, I don't want them to suddenly have hearts of gold, because I've known some bad people and they don't suddenly turn good because they found an orphan on a street corner. And I guess making that dichotomy, I guess I'm moralizing, but I'm trying to say, like, like people who use violence for a living, a friend of mine once said, are wading through shit. Like it's bad. It's the same kind of constant trauma that a lot of medical professionals constantly experience right now in COVID. And it has consequences. And I believe, and this is where a dangerous thing to say, that if you have a moral code about it, like chivalry, that helps keep your chin above the shit. And if you don't, you end up swimming in it instead of wading through it. That's my 2 cents worth. And I try to put some of that on the page. And yet, completely agreeing with Brian, I am also an entertainer. I want to sell books, and I am completely aware that the baddest sociopath I have ever written is almost the most popular character I've ever created. There's something people love about the uncaring sociopath who's like, oh, look, people, we kill them if they're in our way. Otherwise, it would be a waste of energy to kill them. That is somehow delightful. And I get that. And also sometimes it's fun to write that character. So not claiming to be better, just very interested. Scott says, I write an orc. I feel Miles' description right to my soul. Scott, I want to engage with Scott just for a moment and say, my best friend in university, the best role player I have ever known, this is my shout out to him, always played orcs, even when nobody played orcs. And it was always about that. It was always about how other people saw orcs versus his attempts to be moral. And that made for some great role play. Anyway, so Scott, I was set up to love your books from university. Anyway, we're down to our last 7 minutes. So I think it's time for all of you to sell us on your current work and your latest book. And I can't decide who I have gone to the fewest times. So I'm going to start with Brian, because he's right under my picture. Brian, tell us what you're writing now and what you'd like us to run out and buy.
Right now, I'm writing the second book in a new trilogy. That the first book is this book, The Empire's Ruin. There's other books that I've also written that are set in the same world, but you can start with this. And a lot of people have, and they haven't read the earlier books. They think it's fine. Or you can start with the earlier books. But this is the book that I was describing. First chapter, Special Forces mission goes horribly wrong. One of the main characters loses almost all of her closest friends. And she spends a lot of the book really in psychological torment, grappling with that. So if you want a fun, uplifting book, this is not it. But there's also, a poisoned continent, voyages to the end of the earth, an ancient race that's reawakening, all that good fantasy shit.
Okay, I'm sold. I will go buy your books. MJ.
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a couple different projects, but the only book that I have to shill is my only one.
Well, tell us what you're writing right now. It's like a pre-advertisement.
Okay, so yeah, the one I'm working on right now, I'm hoping it will become a fantasy adventure trilogy. where it's this is the most sprawling one. This is the one where I've written my first ever battle sequence. So like I'm tipping into a lot of different fun fantasy elements that I didn't really get the chance to explore in my debut novel. So I'm excited about it and I'm having a great time writing it. So keep tuned to my Twitter and stuff for updates whenever maybe that may be available.
And your Twitter is, MJ, I meant to have Brian advertise his social media too. What's your Twitter?
Oh yeah, so on all social media, I'm at MJ Kuhn Books, just all one word. So Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the above. I'm a good little millennial with all my social medias.
Well done. And Brian?
I
Social
make a
media?
strong effort. I don't love the social media. I'm on Twitter at Brian Staveley, but I'm trying to get people to come to Strava, which is like the app where you can record like your runs and your bike
With the
rides.
workouts, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
It's like, why are you pimping Strava as your author profile? But I just really like Strava. I like seeing pictures of people climbing mountains and running around in the desert and stuff. So yes, you can find me at Twitter at Brian Staveley, but also come find me at Strava. I want to see what adventures you're having.
Okay, that sounds fun. Alex, before I go to you, I'm going to suggest if Scott is listening, Scott, just write what you're writing now, and one of us will read it aloud. Maybe a dramatic reading by Brian. Go ahead, Alex.
Hey, yeah, so my series out currently is Combat Codes. Again, martial arts, gladiators. And I have a secret project that's kind of under wraps at this point. I am writing a work in progress that I would describe as Westworld meets Wolverine. And if you want
Good
to check
shout
out,
line.
if you want, it's alliteration. If you want to check out the, I recently published in Rolling Stone a piece on Anthony Bourdain's. He was secretly writing on Reddit under an anonymous profile on a martial arts Reddit, and some of his writing is pretty awesome there, where he's very, very forthcoming. And if you're a fan of Bourdain, which I am, feel free to check it out. It's in the January, this month's issue of Rolling Stone.
Mythic Lore says, I'd try Westworld meets Wolverine, and frankly, I would too. And I am hugely impressed that you have an article in fact, now I'm jealous. Rolling Stone, like, wow, I'll go hide my head.
Very cool. Yeah.
Scott says, oh, we get to meet Mom in Doom of Oden. More, Scott, write us a paragraph on what you're writing right now. I will take this opportunity to say my most recent book is Artifact Space, and if I had thought, I'd have had a copy to show you. And I'm writing a Bronze Age fantasy that has lots of combat scenes, but also an entire sort of race and group of absolute pacifists who somehow managed to struggle through the Bronze Age while not fighting anyone, at least in part because they are able to simply turn themselves off and die. And when people try to enslave them or do other horrible Iliad-based things to them, they just turn off. And they're very brave, and they're gradually teaching the world a different way. They're not the main characters, but that was part of my experimentation with the last thing, was having some like functioning pacifists. Brian, would you take us out by reading Scott's note there?
Sure. So Scott says, I'm working on the last book in the Grimnir saga and trying to get some short fiction underway. After that, I have a Hyborian Age novel to write.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's Conan? Hyborian Age?
I guess. I don't know.
You can all roll your eyes at my lack of knowledge, but I actually read all of Robert E. Howard, but that was See the Gray? That was a long time ago. Friends, this has been most fun. I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. I really miss having Scott here. I think that we should all buy and read each other's novels and then tell everybody how wonderful we all are.
Miles,
thank you, Miles,
for moderating so well. This is great. And
I appreciate it. Good hanging out with you all.
Yeah. Pleasure.
And Scott, I hope your computer works better tomorrow, because I've put a fair amount of thousands of words into my role-playing adventure, so I'd really like you to be able to play. Anyway, and that will be my last ad. If you want to watch a role-playing game set in one of my fantasy novels with fabulous terrain and miniatures, I'll be running it tomorrow morning. And you'll see how I model some fight scenes, because that's sometimes how I do it. This has been super fun, and I look forward to seeing you all maybe in person with beer.
Absolutely.
All right. Beer
Okay.
sounds good. I'm in.
Yes, indeed.
Right?
See you guys. Thank
Take
you
care,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you all.